Well, many continue to question why Assad's forces were so suddenly vulnerable. Well, for further clarity, we also have with us on the broadcast David Cay Johnston from the Rochester Institute of Technology. As always, sir, thank you for making time for us. Is it a fair assessment that al-Assad's allies, which are Iran, Russia and Hezbollah, are all embroiled in their own conflicts, and Turkey, which backs the rebels, took advantage in the situation?
I think that's exactly what you're seeing. The Assad regime over the last 25 years has not expanded its base much beyond Damascus.
Right.
It has created a lot of enemies through its brutality. The Russians are not in a position to give very much support, not the way they did back about 10 years ago because of the war in Ukraine. And the rebels have been able to unite a diverse group of people. The Kurds, people who were part of ISIS and other interests in the Levant, to try and take down this regime.
With this crisis, though, in Ukraine at the moment, in Gaza and Lebanon, all coming together and overlapping in Aleppo, would you say this is a tectonic shift of kinds?
Well, if the rebels can continue to advance and the police and soldiers drop their weapons basically and run off, which we've seen so far, that would suggest that the regime is in serious danger. One of the reasons Moscow can't do anything is that the Ukraine war has the Russians taking stocks of weapons, tanks, trucks that were in mothballs from the Soviet era and trying to put them into use. And the Russians are losing approximately 1,600 soldiers a day in Ukraine. During World War II, the U.S. only lost 300 soldiers a day on average while fighting wars in both Asia and Europe. So Russia's ability to help the Assad regime is very limited. They, of course, want to do that because Syria has provided them with a warm water port in the Mediterranean for their warships.
Right. So would you then argue also that Iran, meanwhile, which has come off worse in its direct military exchanges with Israel, as many would argue, may also be more cautious to step in or allow its proxies to step in as well?
Well, we haven't seen the Iranians yet do anything terribly significant in this field, and they certainly have their interests tied down a great deal by the wars involving Israel. And Iran, at some point, like every other country, has limited resources. Clearly, the Iranian government wants to support this regime, but we haven't seen them really step up to the plate.
But for the Middle East, it's actually quite tragic. There is a bitter irony that as one conflict comes to a halt with the ceasefire in one place, another one has restarted. So do you think it all gets much worse before it does begin to get better?
Well, I don't know necessarily that overthrowing the Assad regime is worse. It might be much better for the 22 or 23 million people who live in Syria and the million or so who have been displaced. But there's going to be more death and violence for sure. This civil war that started in 2011 has already cost roughly 500,000 Syrians their lives, and
Yes.
2/3 of those have been non-combatants. So it may get worse, but it's distinctly possible we will see a better government in Syria than the brutal dictator who's been in charge since the turn of the century.
As always, sir, thank you so much for joining us with the latest updates and contextualizing the information with us on NDTV.